So, good evening and welcome to Trondheim Kunstmuseum. My name is Johan Borgesen and I'm the director of the museum. Welcome to the fourth of our artist talks in connection with the 2023 Lorck Schive Prize. We're very happy to be hosting these talks in collaboration with the Trondheim Art Academy. And of course also very happy to have Nabil Ahmed as one of the the interlocutor for tonight's talk. The Lorck Schive Prize will be, the winner of the Lorck Schive Prize will be announced in 10 days and at a prize ceremony here at the museum. So if you are in Trondheim, you're very welcome to the museum on September 2nd at 1 o'clock. Also, these talks are being streamed, so if you want to, for those not here, or if this is your first Lorck Schive talk, the others are also available on our website, and this talk will also be available on our website after tonight. But with this, I would like to leave the floor to Joar Nango, nominated for this year's prize, and Nabil Ahmed, who is an artist and professor at Trondheim Art Academy. Welcome.
Thanks. Thanks, Johan. And hey, nice to be here with you. I was really looking forward to this conversation, as I mentioned to you before we started. It's also nice to be back for the fourth installment of the lectures. I was also very happy to have been part of the first one with Ahmed, whose beautiful photo we see over there. Realize that we're also beaming to a live audience wherever they might be, and since we're not as they're not as privileged as us as to be here to experience the works, I wanted to sort of ask you to. Okay, I do have some sections of questions and ideas to put on the table, but I thought it'd be nice to begin with. Europe, everything, and post-capitalist architecture TV, these two, parts of the work that you have here. If you could tell us a little bit about the works and perhaps riffing off of one of the interviews I heard that you have, that you made as part of this program, objects. What kind of... Maybe you can tell us a story or two about some of the objects here.
Yes, for the installation in here, I've done something that I think I quite often do as an artist, and that's sort of lean a little bit back on previously done works, and sort of made I made an installation here that is produced on site with where I took sort of point of departure into two, you can call them maybe artistic platforms. I think since I was a student, I have sort of developed this way of working where I make kind of you could call it a platform where I investigate certain topics. The first one was it was a magazine about indigenous architecture. So having a magazine, it allowed me to sort of within that magazine produce 4, 5, 6 edition numbers of the magazine, and in the magazine I could allow myself to raise different type of questions, and it was kind of like it was the kind of a bit embracive type of creative space. And then I also realized I could invite other people in, like people working with photography or art or text writers, and it became this sort of collective type of platform as well. And since then I have developed at least 5 or 6 different platforms, and it's very and very often none of them have really sort of like a specific date when they sort of end, and it's also hard to point out when they really start. So they're kind of this like ongoing type of projects, and as I said, there's 5 or 6 of them, and there's 2 of them in here, and I wanted to try and sort of combine these 2 platforms and make something that was a little bit of an art installation that sort of was a collage of these 2 projects, and one of them is one project that started 2016 or 2017. It was called European Everything, and that's a platform where it's basically a moving stage, where I built a stage that sort of fitted into my red Mercedes Sprinter van, which is one of the sort of my main tool for working. I work with mobility and architecture. I work with nomadic sort of concepts of space, and the car that I sort of own and work through has sort of become like a backbone or a very important vessel for my production. And when I was invited to do work for Documenta in Kassel and Athens, I sort of started the whole project by filling that van with 60 kilo reindeer meat in a freezer, and a lot of different scrap material, a lot of my tools, my axes, my saws, and I went from Tromsø, where I live in northern Norway, towards Athens, and I spent basically almost a year on the road with the car, working with these objects and materials that I had, trading them and finding new materials and producing sort of a stage in Athens for the Documenta exhibition. And then I invited also people to collaborate with me to produce the stage, and also to produce sculptures and sound pieces and perform also on the stage, of course.
Some of the work here is also therefore collaborative, right? Or
yeah,
all of it, really?
So that's the European Everything sort of framework. It's that stage, and it has been, since Documenta, developing in quite a few different ways. So I made one project in Oslo. I made one in Kvam in Gudbrandsdalen. And it's sort of there has been sort of appeared this like sort of core people in that project, and one of them is a Roma blacksmith. So he's a gypsy, and he's from Romania. So right on the border between Romania and Bulgaria, I spent almost 2 months working with different craftspeople, learning from their way of producing and thinking, especially related to recycling and sort of creative reprogramming of discarded objects as sort of a topic that I'm very interested in. So for me, this person sort of embodied all these like things that were very interesting for me to investigate. So then I invited him here to come, and this is the 6th time that he's been to work, 5th time that he's been working on the project with me, and I think it's the third time in Norway. Yeah, he's been to Bergen with me, and also he came here, and we worked for a week producing some of these lamp objects here. So for me, it's always like very explorative. It's very open-ended. When we work together with the sort of European Everything, it's me in the car with all those tools, and then I invite whatever people that sort of have the time, or that sort of that work with the setting, and then we produce something that explores the idea of recycling, or question, in this case, also a little bit like sort of identity concerning Scandinavian design. We made this copies of this famous Scandinavian design lamps. Yeah. So that's the one platform, and then the other project is that I'm showing in here is one episode of a TV series that I started in 2018. So again, another creative platform where I sort of produce creative, where I put my creative thoughts concerning architecture in, and it's a film project. It's a film project called Post-Capitalistic Architecture TV show. So this was also something that emerged out of Corona times. It was COVID, pandemic, lockdown, and I couldn't really produce as socially as I usually do by going to places and bringing people together. Like, it's always a very sort of social. I like to work very social and bring a lot of people into my works, but when that wasn't possible, I sort of had to sort of reconfigure my methodology a bit, and then I just got this idea that I could use the same red van to to sort of build a little TV studio inside of it, and then travel around and do conversations with people in a sort of COVID-safe way, and then also sort of bring people in online over.
This also makes sense now why you, even though Andy Zombie also lives in Tromsø, that you might have been talking to him via Zoom or online.
Exactly, yeah. COVID friendly, so it was like we invited a couple of people into the car with safe distance, of course, but then we had this, I built this screen that was made out of halibut stomachs, so sewn together this like sort of kind of beautiful, very organic type of canvas to hold the projection. So then we zoomed in and we projected.
Okay, I thought it was fabric, but it's actually halibut.
It's halibut stomachs that is like that I collaborate with this local Sami fisher that fishes this, and because I had read that it's actually connected to another type of investigation I've done, which is it's a project I call Skjevvar, and Skjevvar is it's a very old Sami word that I found in a dictionary. And Skjevvar means, it actually means dried, stretched out halibut stomach put on a wooden frame used as windows. So it's a very old sort of window technology that fascinated me quite a bit. And I started looking in all sort of historical sources in the world of Sápmi, and I didn't find any examples, visual examples of how this halibut stomach window frames looked or how they were made, so I ended up just sort of trying out myself. So I got like a 50 of these stomachs, and then I sort of started under a bridge in my hometown, also with my red car as some kind of a sort of a tool, a mobile little workshop. Started to sort of explore how these stomachs would work when you dried them, and I started sewing them together, and I realized very fast that they didn't work that well as window because they're not really transparent. They're a bit like translucent, so they're a bit like kind of you can't sort of see straight through them. But they hold the light really beautifully because they have like this really oily sort of material, and a bit like a back projection screen. So I have used back projection screen quite often because showing my videos, but then I realized that it was really cool to use that screen because it had this really like a glow when the image was projected on it. But then it was, of course, where you made the seams, it was a little bit like kind of morbid, right? So I thought that was.
I wasn't going to go there, but since you kind of gave us the image. But no, I mean it's also conversations that you are having or interviews with scholars. With artists,
exactly. It's
anthropologists,
a lot of different people, and sort of that way of putting together different type of conversations and trying to bridge categories and disciplines, and also trying to bridge a little bit sort of cultural backgrounds and sort of almost like class systems. Like I interview like scholars and professors, but I also interview my neighbor or family members or my car mechanic. Who I think might be in this. No, he's not. Yeah, he's in this episode actually. Yeah. So I think it's interesting to have this sort of bring in the people that I'm already involved with in my sort of personal life, and sort of try and frame the conversation that we have already had, and then afterwards have. So we film a lot. I do this project with my cousin Ken Bongo, who's a Sami filmmaker. He's a really wonderful artist, of course. So and we sort of started this exploration of. Moving with the camera and doing this sort of improvised conversation, and then sort of just filming hours and hours and hours, and having filmed for a week, then we sort of sit down in the editing studio and we cut and paste all this material that we have together to try and make create some sort of a narrative. And while we do that, we might see that there's certain sort of maybe some patches that are missing, and then we sort of go back to filming. So it's a bit like. It's usually we spend 2 weeks on producing one episode. We have produced 6 now. The 3 first ones were produced for Bergen Kunsthall, the exhibition I did there, and then there's the 4th one is produced for the film festival in Tromsø, and then the 5th one is for actually as a art show in Alaska, a museum there. I don't remember the name of it. Sorry. and then the sixth one's for the Toronto Art Biennale in Toronto. And the sixth one's also filmed in Toronto, so it doesn't have the car, which was like a really big lack.
Might kind of circle back to this TV project, which is super sort of interesting. Also, in maybe we can sort of get there. But when I was hearing you speak about mobility, recycling, sourcing local materials, the question, I mean, sort of the set of questions that I sort of had next to you really relates to this, which is around Sami architecture. Sami architecture or architecture in Sápmi, maybe not the same things, but there is also, you use the term vernacular. I mean, we also have, some kind of perhaps a very, specific ideas of what indigenous architecture might look like, right? In terms of, let's say, form. But we're talking about something that sort of does not reject the form, but does something new in a contemporary sort of time, right? And if, let's say, again, I heard Ande Zombie speaking about responding to change, improvising and so on. The weather and the climate being, two forces, they're again not the same, which aren't only kind of shifting in a benign way, right? Like they're also, shifting in the context of, climate change. And also the kind of incursions that we see on Sami land and territoriality. So I guess the question there is, it's not so much what is Sami architecture, but rather what is for you, what is kind of the political project of Sami architecture?
Yeah. So first of all, it's an interest of mine to find out and to explore and to work with this idea of nomadic space production, but then it's also this very, very personal and I guess heart-driven quest that I'm on since 20 years now, to build conversations and to unfold the question of Sami architecture, to create the conversation around it, and to put political awareness around my culture and how we, in so many cases, are neglected and pushed out of the sort of nation-state build trajectory of architecture. So that's something that started for me as a student. As I said, I had this magazine. It was actually a project I started when I was a student.
What was the magazine called?
It's called Sami Huksendaida, the fanzine. So it's a magazine about Sami Huksendaida. It's a Sami language, Sami word, and it means the Sami art of building. So Samisk byggekunst in Norwegian, for those who speak that, which is the name of the old architectural magazine before it changed its name to Arkitektur and now to Arkitektur. But yeah, so creating this sort of this platform and doing this investigation was something that was like a direct consequence of something I felt was needed in the world of architecture as a student. There was like no one was talking about how there was a little bit of a conversation around what Sami architecture was, but all I found was like it's very sort of colored by this like backward gazing, historicizing, folklorist, fetishistic, whatever that was, perspective of the Sami culture, as if we were a culture that was past and long gone. There was very little conversation around the actual contemporary architecture that exists, because we have quite a few institutional building. There was few examples of what could be considered successful and beautiful Nordic architecture. There was some conversation around, but they were never put in context. They were never sort of, someone had created this sort of, mapped it out and tried to create connections between these different type of buildings. And then there was, of course, also a lot of interesting research to be done in my point of view, on the housing architecture as well, because there's a lot of housing and the sort of the transition from these like old historical turf houses and more type of nomadic and vernacular type of old structures to the more sort of contemporary houses. There's a whole sort of a line of important historical stories to be told. Yeah, that reflects how the Sami culture have been colonized and how we have been sort of negotiating architecture within colonial superpowers above us. So these questions were something I was started to just being interested in and learning from, and through that project I just sort of unraveled what has now become like a 20-year long career in a way. I'm still talking about the same things. I'm exploring new formats to investigate things. I'm also so lucky that actually I'm now also allowed to be working in a bit like real architectural projects, which is of course in one way a bit maybe a bit insulting to the art scene, but I don't think I want necessarily to be an artist. I think for me to actually build and to work with architecture as a real format is sort of a bit where I want to be and where I'm sort of heading towards.
But so, of course, those things aren't mutually exclusive. I mean, your career really demonstrates that, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so there's two battlegrounds, if you'd like, right? One is the political space or the cultural space, let's say in Norway or other countries in Scandinavia, in terms of the recognition of Sami rights and culture, etc., in which architecture, plays a part. But there's also the architecture as a kind of field, as a where there's modernism and there's all these other isms and stages, or where, let's say, the kind of architecture that you're practicing and your what the platforms that you're creating are somehow killing two birds with the same stone, somehow dealing with both at the same time, right? If we could call it this. So I mean, in the sense, therefore,
maybe not kill any birds.
I mean, this was just a turn of phrase, I suppose. But so where, let's say, the library, and I'm of course referring to this large project that you've been developing in Venice, the Architecture Biennale, and where I suppose you are is it that you're the first Sami architect / artist who is representing Scandinavian countries in a space like Venice?
Yeah.
But the question is that, let's say, if the library is a kind of platform you called, right? Like, what other institutional forms that you think this project could take?
That's a very good and interesting question, actually. I think,
for example, a school.
Exactly. Yeah. So exactly. Yeah. So in May, early May next year, the school will open.
Oh, right. Oh.
So it's sort of an extension of the Girigumpi project, thinking about, because Girigumpi has been, I don't know if you're all familiar with it, but Girigumpi Sami Architecture Library, that's the Sami name of it. It's a project that is sort of it's an extension of this type of conversation and investigations I've done, where I made a library that's also 5 years ago for a project in the north of Norway, and I built a small shack, a traditional Sami mobile house on skis, and I put sort of all my researched material into that library, and I've been moving around with it for 5 or 6 years now, and it actually is a library, so it actually works like that. But it's always when it lands in new sort of framework by invitation, usually it unfolds and it becomes a space that's very sort of social as well. So it's producing a lot of workshops. I very often invite creatives, Like I invited Lolly here for the European everything, working with copper. He works with copper. I very often invite people working with wood or leather, which is like the two sort of backbone materials for Sami architecture and Sami space production, material production. So in that project, it has sort of always had this very pedagogical type of dimension to it. It's books, obviously. It's a space to learn in, right? And
Can you check them out, take them home?
You cannot do that yet. I would have loved to have been able to, but none of the institutions that I sort of collaborated with have been able to afford doing that because they would allow for it.
But I mean, libraries themselves is far changing, right? I mean, in the UK, we call them learning centers.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they're sort of not this place where you stay quiet and you just read a book or do your research.
Yeah, and I think
it's kind of like lively places, right?
Yeah, I think they also were in the old sort of Greek civilization. The libraries were really this like places for discourse, and for exchanging ideas. And yeah, so I think.
Tell us more about the school.
So yeah, exactly. So building a bit on that, I was I've been how do you say it? I've been a bit tired of talking. There's a lot of talk about these things, and there's also a bit. I sort of got to a point where I really wanted to start building a bit more. So I've been spending a lot of time and actually years on learning how to build traditional, learning how to swing the axe, stuff like that. Which is, I'm not in any way an expert, but I have built 3 traditional Sami turf houses now, and learning how. I built one in Oslo, I built one in the north as well, 2 in the north. So it's a bit for me, sort of turning my back a little bit to the intellectualization, or whatever you could say, of the topic that I'm interested in, moving towards the material-based knowledge has sort of led to this, because I want to make a school that is sort of based around practical skill sharing. So practical skill sharing in terms of this traditional, this ways of building. This vernacular way of building. So I'm bringing in people that are experts to share their knowledge and to sort of, because a lot of these people that know how to build in these traditional ways, they are very often hosting workshops for people that don't know how to build. So there's no platform for these people that actually know to meet. So it's a bit like it's sort of an school of experts of Sami turf house builders that's gonna get together in Bodø. Next year. It's also by invitation of the Bodø.
The capital of culture?
Exactly, their capital of culture.
The European capital of culture.
So that's, and with some generous support from some institution, we have sort of been able to start. We're sort of in the middle of making it. We don't know exactly the outcome of it yet, but it's, for me, it's a really interesting opportunity to bring together this like kind of practical type of knowledge into one pool that has never happened before. They're all sort of, and also it's very important to remember that these people that know how to build, they're usually connected to very different institutions in Sápmi, very, very far apart. Like Sápmi stretches from south of here to the very, very north of Norway and even into Russia. So both in Sweden, Finland, and Norway, you have these people that are, they're sort of taking care of museums, or they're building in the mountains, and they're maybe doing workshops now and then, building these type of traditional structures, but they're never sort of able to meet each other. So that's a little bit what I thought would be a very interesting sort of project, is to get these people to meet and to share and to network, and then also bring in all the Sami architects, so that we sort of, us that have a more sort of a modern type of architectural interest and design practice. We are 8 or 9, there's 8, 9 of us. We could sort of meet and sort of share skills with these like more traditional craftsmen.
And that's from across Sápmi, not just from the Norwegian side?
It's all over, from all over Sápmi, Sweden, Norway, and Finland, and Russia. Very few from Russia, unfortunately, but that's how it usually is. So that's the school. The real format of it, I don't really know, but it's Girigumpi that sort of will somehow be in the sort of on backstage of that project. Facilitating it a bit. But no, that's a really good question you're asking, and I'm really interested in this also, the extension of that. What could that type of school thing be used for also in the future? It's called it has a Norwegian name right now, Gammeskolen. So that's that sort of the branding of it. I really, Gamme is the word for the Darfegård, the turf house. So it's yeah, it's in the making. It's in the making. I'm already now. Yeah, there's things that.
Just to let you all know, there will be time for questions shortly. So before I forget that thought again, I just thought I would get it out to you all. So I mean, so materials and people, you know, there's a kind of a collaboration, right, between both. There's also, I'm just sort of, you know, coming back to the works here. I mean, in a way, this was already, you know, these ideas at work, right? I mean, in a way, that's kind of like a through line, that you're not, often your role as an artist or an architect isn't necessarily to direct or to build, but to bring people together. But then also somehow bring materials together, materials they may not want to, didn't even know they wanted to meet each other, or you'd sort of find them along the way, right? So I just wanted to know a little bit about this, you know, this methodology.
Yeah, exactly, and that also goes a bit back to the question that you asked previous, which I maybe didn't answer so straightforward.
Like, is that something that can be taught if we talk about a school? I know you kind of said it's a school for experts, so,
yeah,
but it's a very closed group, right? You know, in the sense that, well, opening it up to other people, other architects or other students, or someone who may have a very different idea of what architecture or contemporary art is.
That's a really, could that be, yeah, so let me tell you, I think it's sort of, to put it a bit in context, it's a bit, you know, throughout these years, all this research I've done on architecture, there's, you know, there's certain concepts that come up, and then maybe I write a text about it, or maybe I make a little art project about it. There's this like different type of interesting investigations that unravel things, right? Like,
it's a great term.
Yeah. So and one of the things, which is like one of the main things that have been really sort of sticking with me for many years already, is like it's this particular type of attitude that you find within all nomadic cultures of the world. And you also find especially strong in the Sami communities and in many of their sort of reindeer herding communities. And that's this special capacity and this special way of solving problems, improvising with materials at hand. Basically solving problems there and then when they appear, because you have almost nothing.
What do we do now as the little image?
Yeah, exactly. It's the question that Andy Zombie, one of our great scholars, is asking in the movie there. Yeah, and he's one of my sort of main inspirational sources for thinking and speaking about this. And he once called it the competence of improvisation. And in Sápmi we have this very strong competence of improvisation. And I really like that term when it comes to place building and design. And this sort of this capacity to really be situated and to work with whatever's at hand. For me, it's kind of an attitude. It's a kind of way of being in the world that is a good question. Can you learn that? I think you can learn that, of course, but I think it really demands a little bit of a different kind of personalized type of learning curve or something. I think it's more about openness, and it's more about maybe positioning yourself in a more humble relation to the world and the material complexity of the world.
Especially at the time when you can, you know, learn how to swing an axe from watching YouTube tutorials, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but so I think it's a very, it has unraveled so many interesting conversations for me to talk about the Sami competence of improvisation. I also coined the term some years later called indigenuity.
Right.
So indigenuity being a word that sort of is a word play on indigeneity, so indigenous cultures, and being indigenous, and ingenuity, which is creativity and inventiveness. So these two words put together became indigenuity.
Like you could have engineering.
Indigeneering, maybe. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it's a bit of a slapstick, kind of simple type of. But I very often use a bit like simple, humorous wordplays and stuff like that. I kind of like that sort of shoulder down, bit straightforward, folky type of communication. So,
but having said that, I mean, these ideas are very big. They're really, and they connect to, many places in the world. So in a way, this in a way is I think also speaks to the also when I met with Ahmed, this was very clear, right, that it's not really just about here's I'm a solo artist, here's my work, which absolutely fine to do that, but we hear about the climate emergency, there's it's a terrible and a terrific time to be living, right? So in a way, I think this practice, this way of working that you're, I mean, of which I know very little, but that that is that I'm kind of seeing, right? It's really important also in the context of, I think, pushing forward more progressive ideas in Norwegian society. I mean, where I'm also new, relatively speaking. So, yeah, I mean, in a sense, how can these ideas sort of circulate and percolate? Or is the idea that they should be sort of something that happens in a more organic way, where it's not, becoming more institutionalized, I suppose.
Yeah, I'm experiencing a lot of growing interest in these type of topics, and working with this, like the flow of materials, for example, which this also is. Yeah. I think you very fast, when you position yourself like that, you also see the importance of these type of attitudes within within material economy, within how local sourced materials, local sourced food is sort of entering the material flow, the material production cycle surrounding us. And I think we need a more humble sort of positioning in those type of situations, so those type of topics. And I think you see it everywhere, and I think it's really, really needed in architecture.
Right.
And I think that even if my approach is like, it's almost like kind of naively, very bit like simple in a way.
But 20 years of practice, we cannot just brush that aside. That's that's a solid time thinking and doing this work.
My point is, I felt that the world of design and architecture has, for a very long time, sort of a bit like overseen this type of questions and topics. But I feel that now we're entering a time where I've been working with this very long, and I think people from the world of architecture and design are much more open to it. 12 years ago, I made the project. It's another platform. It was a collective. It's called the FFB, Fellesskapsprosjektet å fortette byen. It's a bit like an activist type of architecture group. Me and two friends made, and we did like 20 projects in different places in urban space. And we worked with temporary architecture, just very much influenced by this competence of improvisation. Yep. And we worked recycling. We always worked with almost no budgets. Working with a bit like giving our voice as architects, designers to a bit marginalized people in groups. We work with Roma people, with blacklisted plant, with drug addicts, and different type of groups. And then I remember we were also like playing a lot with sort of the aesthetics and trying to find we made a manifesto. Where we were describing the type of architecture we were made in a bit like sort of tongue-in-cheek, humorous kind of way, but one of the things we said once was that we were FFB, the architecture collective. We are making an architecture celebrating the failure of capitalism, and we made a big poster on the National Museum of Architecture in Oslo 12, 13 years ago. And at that time, that slogan was like, people were laughing of it, and like almost like mocking. And for us also, it felt really humorous to say something like that, celebrating the failure of capitalism. But now, when I do lectures at school or show that slogan, like the young people are just like totally like, yeah. They're like, it has the sort of the world surrounding, or the world sort of meeting that slogan has changed completely. And I think we're sort of just seeing the start of that. I think that these type of critiques are so important and needed, and there's just like a hunger for it everywhere. These projects and this sort of thinking patterns that are, you know, sort of rejecting capitalism or trying to sort of create alternative narratives or platforms. Yeah.
I mean, I suppose in other words, this post-capitalism is not so much as like a, you know, a big concept as such, but it's maybe it can be a daily reality, you know, right? It can be something that's kind of already happening, right?
Oh, absolutely, it is everywhere, and I think, yeah, of course, it's all sort of a structure. So I think we're all involved in it, also, or most of us, yeah. But yeah, yeah, and I think also if you draw, you can even draw like sort of parallel lines to what you're also seeing a real strengthening interest in relation to indigenous cultures and indigenous design, indigenous art as well. And I think that this is very much related to exactly this. There's this like lack of alternative trajectories and sort of historical narratives.
But not only you know, in that, you know, formal way of thinking about indigenous architecture, but precisely the kind of work that you're doing, which is, you know, it's not only speaking to indigenous people, even though that's, you know, actually I did want to ask you, Sami communities, what do they make of your work?
It varies so much. I have really amazingly strong community, like support from my communities.
That's important.
Yeah, it is totally, and I don't think I could have allowed myself to do this if it wasn't for that. I think there's this, especially when I talk about this competence of improvisation, it is something that I think everyone coming from having a Sami background, even indigenous background, they usually totally just get it like that. It's just it's something that really binds us together, and it is really a true type of aesthetical tradition that we have, and people relate to it, but people have maybe different type of connotations to it a bit. Like for example, my aunt, you know, I've been traveling around in my home community, taking a lot of photos of this like funny, weird backyard inventions. That's a part of this photographic project, and actually 5 of these photos are printed on plexi in the exhibition.
I was wondering what those were.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, they're like, yeah, and they're part of this indigenuity archive I have, like archiving this, not only in Sápmi, but also in like Inuit cultures, and I've been in Greenland and Mongolia, and also like in Latin America. It's like wherever you go, it's not only indigenous, there's also like in like poverty-ridden areas in big cities, you can also find this very interesting sort of homemade type of designs, where very often, you know, the people making them and the people using them are the same person. So it's not designer.
You have to come to Bangladesh, I think.
Pretty sure
you'll see a lot of great examples.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Yeah. But what this also sometimes become really interesting and humorous is when you find this, like the way people are almost like as a little bit in a sort of intuitive or sort of subtle way, almost like giving a little like fuck you to the Western capitalistic system, like you reusing, you know, ketchup bottles as handle for your door, or you're de-rusting your knife in Coca-Cola because Coca-Cola is such an etching type of acidic liquid that you can actually, when you have a knife that's rusted, you can like stick it into the Coca-Cola because it will etch. So this kind of thing, you know, like seeing people reprogramming this sort of Western capitalistic products in their own way that's completely for another setting and indigenous type of uses, for me, is art. That's like wonderful. And collecting these stories is I think it's been really kind of fun and interesting, and then trying to create some sort of narrative and story around them.
No, and that's important because there's going to be people coming up with ways of living, and improvising and so much. But then, to bring that into within the context of these investigations or these platforms, there's a very clear, through line here, right, in the way you're sort of, slowly but surely, advancing these ideas forward, right? And I suppose the school is perhaps like one manifestation, right? Where I suppose my final maybe question to you before we sort of open it up to the audience is I suppose not one or the other, right? But that this is in a way a very collective process, and the question is if, how many people do you need on board, or is this something that happens within, let's say, these long-term collaborators that you already have, which is absolutely fine. But I'm just saying, like, do you see this to be something that could be, relatable to a social movement, for instance?
I actually don't know. I think it's always it's a very tricky thing always for me to move into this very sort of explicit political ambitions. And I guess that's also why I'm stuck in the art world a bit. It's because I feel it's hard to be very politically and still precise. Because if I have, it's a bit like it has more of a personal, I guess, how my brain is vulnerable, how I feel a bit vulnerable, or how I'm screwed together. But it's like, I think it's hard to be very, very strong and opinionated about anything. Like being very strong and opinionated about something, then it means that you have to be strong and opinionated about something else. And then I haven't really thought about that. And then the whole sort of complexity of being political scares me a bit, in a way. But so that's also probably why I feel this urge and have this tendency to build this sort of autonomous spaces,
right?
These platforms where I can, together with like-minded, sort of explore and build worlds that definitely are political and that definitely are opinionated, but they aren't sort of directing themselves to the sort of major society as attempts to change anything. But maybe they are, and maybe they are the way that I, working with this type of formats, is maybe the way I feel that I'm contributing to change better than if I sort of
I totally hear you.
Make movements.
Yeah. And not everybody has to do everything.
Yeah.
Also, it's supposed to be then people coming together. With whatever it is they want to do. But importantly, this recognizing this vulnerability that might manifest in other people in other ways is also important. Can't be this perfect. That's not even the idea. Remotely. Thank you so much for this, but we continue now in the short minutes that we have. Please feel free to post any questions to Joar.
And when you do so, please ask for the microphone.
Yes.
I just want to say that, I think that there are different political strategies and different ways of affecting change. And I think one of the most subtle ones is working on individuals, but through subversive gestures and subversive strategies like the ones that you use. In this exhibition, you also you apply indigenuity to a strong marker of, shall we say, bourgeois Scandinavianism. the Poul Hansen lamp. Could you elaborate a little bit about what brought you to it, and is this a peace gesture, or is it a subversive undermining gesture?
Yeah, what is that really? It's I think it's a little bit of a, you could say, like a side comment in the whole work. I think for me the main project we're seeing here is like bringing Lajos Kabur, the Roma blacksmith here, and sort of working our way into sort of a common aesthetic expression. But then, you know, we had this idea that I don't know where it even came from, and I don't even know how to sort of explain the meaning of it. But that's also a little bit why I like it. And that it was that, hey, why don't we make handmade copies of this famous, iconic Scandinavian Paulsen design lamps? And because I knew that when we do that with Lolle, they're not going to turn out become true copies.
One of them has a cobra on it.
Yeah, exactly. And he's just like this. He has this like extremely creative mind that will always sort of elaborate on things or find his own solutions. And you know, I could just see him trying to, like, you know, build the sort of measured perfect shell, and then he was just like sneaking in like some old chandeliers he brought from his grandma in Romania that he was just like welding onto the lamps, and just like keep building this like much more aesthetical, like he says, sample but sophisticated type of aesthetic, which I really, really like. So I think it was more about. I don't think that is necessarily like, it's not in any way like a critique on the lamp per se, but it's maybe more about sort of a comment on the uniformity and the conformity that we in our society tend to move towards when we talk about taste, architecture, and design. And I think that that's so boring. I think we really need to, you know, sort of open up our minds. And I'm a maximalist, but of course there's also my taste in things. But I thought that was maybe more. That's where it came from. I love those lamps; they're beautiful, and they spread the light beautifully. And so there's like, it's nothing wrong with them. It's more about just wanting to add something more to the world.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's really interesting, and I'm very excited that you're also here. But I'm wondering because, for example, when you're now with your recent exhibition at the Venice Architecture Biennial, which is one of the spaces that is kind of this big institution, and usually artists, or in this case architectures as well, that present there, they have this long-standing plan. They have maybe already prefabricated the works that they're going to present, and it's more like assembling them on the spot. Whereas your approach through improvisation and making works site-specific, I think is very strong and very necessary, and it reflects a lot of things in society. Like, it's political in itself without you having to say it. But I'm just wondering about could you maybe share some of the interactions that you've had with the institutions that are maybe not used to these kind of approaches, and or maybe, I'm just wondering what kind of comes up when you're just going to make something on the spot?
Oh, yeah, good question. That's it always puzzles me, and it's always very challenging. I think a lot of also this politicality that we talk about, this like subtle type of politicality, also somehow in a weird way is like seeping into that relational meeting between my methodology and the common institutional methodology. And it's a lot of clashes, but there's also a lot of beauty and collaboration in that. So it's like, it's one way I feel it's always, I don't know if I'm like a shit disturber or a therapeutic, but sometimes I feel like it's a little bit like elements of both when I come into the institution. And there's very often I feel like it's like getting a bit like visible a little bit, like how flexible the institution are, and through flexibility I also somehow can tell a little bit about how serious they are about wanting to engage with the topic of my work a bit. So I don't know, that's not a good answer, maybe a bit chaotic, but I've taken Venice as an example. I feel trust. There was a tremendous trust in me, and the team that I brought. Because of course, in that big project, I worked with a really, really incredible team. It's not me. I'm just one out of 11 people. And 6 of those people are like my best friends, and I worked with them for years. And there's no one that could replace them. And there are people that know there are artists. They love to work with this type of improvised, site-specific production. Lolly coming here could have been one of them. Robert Julian, who followed me and produced this show, this work here, also one of them. An artist from Tromsø. So there's this sort of trust in the team that I bring from the institution. And in Venice, that was quite special. Like really, of course, they were helping out, but I think they were also a little bit like sort of, they didn't always know exactly what to do or help, but they just sort of like gave me space and gave me time and possibility, and just sort of, then we together as a team sort of worked it out. So there's something about that also, like how much of a risk the curators, I think, took in that show is like tremendously, it's quite beautiful. And it's a really an honor for me to experience. And I feel like maybe that in so many ways is what's really needed. You know, that like it's not if this sort of colonial sort of gatekeepers that these institutions are, because they are, if they open their doors, then at least, you know, the sort of the first, that's a really sort of a good sort of step towards some sort of reconciliating type of situation where I'm allowed in and given space and trust. If I'm not given trust, then I don't know what happened. Yeah. But that's in the art world, right? And then there's the rest of the world. And then there are all those other doors. And then there are all those other gatekeepers. There are not so many doors that are open like that in the rest of the world. So we're really like a whole community of Sami people that are knocking on those doors now. Or we've always been maybe, but I think it's important that the world follows. Yeah.
Definitely. Thanks.
Anybody else before we round up the evening?
Just to dwell a bit on the outdoors, I was just wondering, because when you talk about the institutional trust that Venice provided you, we also talk about a practice that's been going on for 20 years, and I'm wondering if there's been a change in this institutional trust, because you also talk about the change of opinions in terms of the designers, the architects, the art world, I guess, in general. You say the institutions give you trust. I guess there, for some time, also have been a process where you need to take trust. Or how's the process been with the institutions? Have them opened more up through your practice or through the 20 years you've been working? Or how's that, like knocking in doors or doors opening for you? How's that process been?
I think that the world has, I don't know, but it's also like me getting older and more experienced, and also obviously having done this bit like, I feel like I'm still feel like I'm doing exactly the same that I did 15 years ago. Nothing changed. I'm just like less articulate and a bit more distracted because I have too much going on with kids and stuff. So it's more about, I guess, I feel it's a combination. I think that the world has changed. I hope so. But it's also probably a little bit like, you know, that I have. It's easier to get trust if you have sort of can show that you've done it before, or that there are this kind of this annoying way that the world works, like this architecture collective that I told you about. Like, I think we aren't active anymore, because you know, things change and we grow apart as human beings. But I think for me it's like really sad that none of these big sort of institutional opportunities came to us. That we were acting for 10 years, and we were doing stuff that's like no one else did at that time. We were asking questions really early on that was really important, but we had no money. We just totally like, we couldn't survive off it anymore. All of us got families, and it wasn't possible to run around doing project for nothing anymore. So, but that's also the beauty of it, maybe in one way. But I feel like I'm a little bit disappointed maybe in one way that wasn't allowed more space. For example, as an example, but also like that's probably how the world works, or I don't know. Like.
In 10 years, they're going to ask for a reunion, some architectural museum.
Sorry?
In 10 years, some architectural museum is going to ask for a reunion and like seeing how great it was like 20 years ago, and they're coming back. And,
Yeah,
Thank you.
it's
Okay, so thank you very much for everyone for coming, and Joar and Nabil for this talk. And I want to remind again that in 10 days we will know who has been awarded the 2023 Lorck Schive Prize. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.